All right, folks, let's take a look at our 13th skill here, which is sourcing and situation. This is the first of a two-lesson sequence on this skill, and it's another one of those that becomes second nature to historians, but requires a little bit of practice. We've been practicing throughout the term already, though, so we're just kind of highlighting it here. This skill asks us to think about how the context surrounding a source affects our arguments using that source. So let's take a closer look here. So our goal with sourcing and situation is to look at multiple areas of context around a source so we can then use that information to build a more persuasive argument. It shows our reader that we understand that sources were not created in order to answer our questions. Instead, they were created for their own reasons. As writers, then, we have to explain the connections we see between the source and our purpose with that source. So, this is a skill that has become second nature every time you encounter a source. Even before you start reading the source, you should start to explore its context. In the next slide, I'll explain a bit more fully what I mean by a source's context, but this has to become an automatic skill. On the AP exam, you use this skill a bit on multiple choice and short answer questions, but it's one of the elements of the DBQ that can turn a good essay into a great one. It's there that this skill becomes really valuable. So, step one is to look at the sourcing information and brainstorm. You may be familiar with the author. What do you know? What about the time frame? What are the things happening at the time to shape what the source might say? As a historian, you should do this before you read the source. You may even get to the point where you can predict what the source is going to say based on what you know about it. Step two is to describe the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation or context, and its audience. I like to think of this in terms of OPVL, the origins, purpose, value, and limitations. If you think about it, all of the elements I just listed will affect what a source says. If I'm writing to my daughter, I'm going to take a different tone than if I was writing to the president. If I'm writing a diary entry, my audience is very different than if I'm preparing a speech for Congress. If I'm writing in the middle of a war, my tone is going to be different than if I'm writing after surviving that war. If I support abolition, my writing will sound different than if I oppose it. So as I describe those elements, I can think in terms of origins. Who's the author? When and where was it written? Its purpose. Why was the source produced? What was the author's goal? What is the author trying to achieve? The value. Is the information unbiased, objective, consistent? What can it be used for in my argument? What does it tell us that can help us persuade our audience with our argument? And finally, the limitations. What's missing from the document that keeps us from writing persuasively? Is it corroborated by other documents, or are there elements that don't make it very reliable? So step three is to take the information from step two and explain why the information I've developed is relevant to my argument. What connections are you making? I like to use the sentence stem. This element, like audience or context or point of view, supports my argument because. It's not the most poignant prose, but it gets the point across. So let's practice. So let's take a look at a source and practice. Even before reading, I'll check the sourcing information. This is a proclamation delivered by Andrew Jackson in December of 1832. Just from that, I know it's probably an official address or a letter to Congress and thus to the entire world. I also know that the nullification crisis dealt with South Carolina's objections to the tariff of 1828 and the tariff of 1832. I also know that the issue was really the federal government's ability to force states to do things, like maybe abolish slavery. Even before I've read the source, I know those things. So I'll read the source now, and then I'll start describing the point of view, the purpose, the historical situation, and the audience. And so after describing each of those, I can then also describe the origins, purpose, value, and limitations. Right? Step three asks us to explain how and why these elements support our argument. Since I haven't been asked a question, I can't do that part yet. So we'll skip step three in this assignment. Next time, though, we'll have a practice question so we can give that third step a shot. So now it's your turn to practice. Good luck. Have a good time.